Mysteries. One of the greatest joys of life is solving them. And that's a principle I live my life by. Unfortunately, as somebody whose entire life is tied up into anime, some of which aren't even done yet, a large part of my life is mysteries. And listen, sometimes I get the answer to these mysteries, but other times I have to create the answers to these mysteries. I have to parse through the information given in order to build a logical and rational hypothesis that answers the question that I have in a satisfactory way. Though I do greatly prefer when an anime or a manga is just like,
Oh, you had that question? Here's the answer.
One Piece is really good at it. You know who's not really good at it though? Naruto. See, one of the biggest beauties of Naruto is it's such a rich and vast and well-lived-in world. However, in a world as rich and as vast as the Naruto universe, there's gonna be a lot of characters. And in a universe with a lot of characters, there's gonna be a lot of powers. And with a lot of powers comes a lot of questions. And in a world with a lot of characters with a lot of powers that lead to a lot of questions, you can do one of two things. You can take individual time to make sure you answer every single question about every single character and any situation they might ever come into, which is what One Piece does, but it's also why One Piece is probably going to be 2,000 chapters long. Or you can say, yeah, that looks cool. We're going to leave it at that. We'll see you next chapter. That's what Naruto did. And genuinely, there's no right or wrong. Like I've already stated, obviously it's better when I have a question that gets answered by the person writing the story, but anime's greatest mysteries are how I kind of make a living. So while it would be incredible if every manga or anime was a sprawling anthological tale tied together through the tears of people keeping up with it weekly like One Piece, unfortunately, that can't be our situation, and it's why you have people like me. And when it comes down to questions revolving around powers in Naruto, there is no question greater than what was Hashirama's Sage Mode? Sure, people can wonder about what Madara's MS ability was, or how Minato had enough chakra left after battling Obito to pull out half of Kurama's soul using Reaper Death Seal, but when it comes down to it, if you want to get the #1 Google hit for questions revolving around Naruto, it's what was Hashirama's Sage Mode? And here's the thing, we've dedicated numerous videos to trying to explore that very question. We've parsed together every bit of information we have about Hashirama to try and lead ourselves to the most logical and easily digestible answer out there. Recently, I was tagged in a video on TikTok a couple of thousand times that stated that what I believe about Hashirama's Sage Mode might actually be incorrect. So there's another theory, a real theory with some serious teeth that might disprove every bit of information I've ever pulled on Hashirama's Sage Mode. This 60-second TikTok created by Doran's World asked the question, what if Hashirama was a sun sage? Like the big old fireball in the sky sage. And I gotta say, it's a compelling theory. So sit back and relax, because today we're tackling one of the oldest questions known to man. In our video, is Hashirama a sun sage? But before we get to theorizing about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me talking about theories in anime, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where I talk about any anime that's not Naruto or Boruto. Or if you just like the idea of me talking about anime, you're gonna love my brand new anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So, the sun. Some know it as a deadly laser, some know it as the only reason that there's life on this rock. But regardless of what you think about the sun, it's inarguable that it is not the strongest thing in our universe. It's a ball of combusted helium and hydrogen millions of times larger than the Earth. But is it also the source of Hashirama's power? See, from the moment that we saw Hashirama's Sage Mode, people have speculated as to what his Sage Mode was. Because the Sage Mode that Hashirama displays isn't anything like what we've seen from other sages. He doesn't get the orange marking and the yellow eyes of a toad sage, and he doesn't get the slitted eyes of a snake sage. Everything about Hashirama's Sage Mode defies all conventional things we know about Sage Mode. Because so far as everything else Naruto has proven to us, there's only two ways to get a Sage Mode, and that's either in Mount Mubuko with the toads or in Ryuchi Cave with the snakes. Considering the fact that Hashirama didn't have a toad summon or a snake summon, both of these seem incredibly unlikely, which has led people to a myriad of different answers. See, most people postulate that Hashirama is some kind of sage of an animal that lives its life revolving around wood, like a beaver sage or a woodpecker sage. While some people decide to be even more derivative than that, just assuming that he is a tree sage. Now, obviously, all of this stems from the fact that Hashirama has a Kekkei Genkai that he and he alone had for a very long time. And that Kekkei Genkai is wood release. And therefore people speculated that because Hashirama had a special connection with beavers or woodpeckers or even just the trees, that's why he was able to use wood release in the first place. And there's kind of a track record for this kind of thing. As we know, the Gaara is only able to manipulate sand because of his connection to Shikaku, and that Shikaku has continued to give him that blessing even after being separated from him. So it's a possibility that somewhere in Hashirama's life he stumbled upon some sage beaver or woodpecker or ant that he just got super close to and decided to learn how to control trees from. Kind of like how humans learned to bend in the Avatar universe. And while these theories are kind of cool, they're not predicated on anything outside of the fact that Hashirama has wood release. And quite honestly, at least these theories have the added benefit of being cool even though they're not built on anything. As other people speculate that Hashirama is just a sage or a human sage. That is to say that he taught himself how to tap into the nature energy around him because he was manipulating wood through wood release, and wood has nature energy in it. And therefore by controlling the natural constructs of wood and feeling that they have energy in them, he figured how to draw energy out of that and mix it with his own and just became a sage of himself. That is to say that he didn't become a toad sage or a beaver sage or a snake sage, he just became a sage, not manipulated or guided by any sage animal. And a similar line of logic is used to describe him as a tree sage. Now, the camp that I've fallen in for years is that Hashirama is none of the previous listed things. See, I speculate that Hashirama is a slug sage. That instead of going to Mount Mubuko or Ryuchi Cave, Hashirama went to Shikatsu Forest, which is the third of the unexplored sage regions in the Naruto universe. And Shikatsu Forest doesn't have toads or snakes, but instead slugs, with the most prominent amongst those slugs being Lady Katsuya. Now, the reason that I speculate that Hashirama is a slug sage is because slugs are confirmed to be sage animals. They hail from an unexplored sage region. And on top of this, we've only ever seen the sage modes of summonable animals, as both toads and snakes are summoned very frequently. On top of this, there's Hashirama's healing factor, which ties rather perfectly into the moveset of both Lady Katsuya and all sage slugs, as Lady Katsuya and all of the sage slugs have the ability simply by coming into contact with somebody to heal them. And at an absurd level, mind you. Lady Katsuya, while in an incredibly dissected form, was strong enough to bring Tsunade's two bisected halves back together and heal her entirely. In fact, it was Lady Katsuya's summoning during the Pain Invasion arc that basically kept a fair amount of people alive. And the fact that Hashirama has an inherent healing factor that's incredibly similar to the level of healing that Lady Katsuya and other slug sages are able to impart on people they come into contact with implies to me at least that there's a possibility that at one point he trained with them. Tie this into the fact that the long markings along Lady Katsuya's side are eerily reminiscent of the markings that Hashirama manifests when entering his sage mode, and you have what I believe to be the most evidence for a theory of what kind of sage Hashirama would be. However, there has been another legitimate contender brought forth to the table. And that theory is that instead of being a slug sage, Hashirama is a sun sage. Oh, and for those of you who are gonna try and be like,
well, if Hashirama's a slug sage, why isn't Tsunade a slug sage?
Sexism. We all know it. If he made her a slug sage, she would be stronger than Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Oh, she gets a sage mode and 100 healings, she would be broken. And then Kishimoto wouldn't have the opportunity to write her into situations like getting saved by a 12-year-old. Also, she probably would have beaten Nagato in a fight. But why is this sun sage mode theory compelling? What evidence is there to back it up? Well, I'm gonna be honest, it's mostly semiology. And semiology, for those of you who don't know, is the study of symbols and their origins. See, this theory is mostly predicated at looking at the symbols that arise on Hashirama's face when he enters sage mode. And those symbols are broken down into two camps: the symbol that arises on his forehead and the symbols that arise around his eyes. The first symbol we're going to talk about is the symbol that arises on his forehead. See, this symbol in Hashirama's sage mode has always been interesting, because in every other perfect sage, the only change we've seen aesthetically has been to the eyes. At least that's the case for Minato and Naruto. But it's not the case for Mitsuki, our most recent perfect sage and our first ever perfect snake sage. Because when Mitsuki enters his perfect snake sage mode, he gets a change to his eyes aesthetically, but also grows a horn, which would technically infer that he's not a perfect sage, because we were told by Jiraiya the more imperfect your sage mode is, the more you look like the thing that you are the sage mode of. And manifesting a horn would point us in the direction that Mitsuki is not actually a perfect sage, but he's said to be a perfect sage. So it's kind of in the air. But regardless, Hashirama manifesting this symbol on his forehead is weird. So what is this symbol? Is it a target? No. According to Doran's World, this symbol actually hails from ancient Chinese writing, specifically Oracle Bone Script. See, Oracle Bone Script is kind of the predecessor to the Chinese written language. These were an ancient form of Chinese characters scribed on bone, be that turtle or ox bone, and were usually used in divinations or fortune telling, and tie their roots to somewhere between 4,000 and 2,000 BC. So anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. Now, over 150,000 of these pieces of ancient writing have been discovered in China, and a lot of them are pyromantic divinations of the last 9 kings of the Shang dynasty. And the way that this works into the theory is that within these Chinese oracle scripts, the symbol for the sun is exactly the symbol on Hashirama's head, a small filled out circle surrounded by a larger circle. Now, we're all generally aware, at least if you've been following this page for a fair amount of time, that Kishimoto loves taking things from Japanese and Chinese history and working them into Naruto. However, I will say my immediate reaction to this piece of information was, it's a bit niche, right? That is until, of course, I read that the Chinese oracle scripts, as the predecessors for Chinese written language, were also the predecessors for Japanese written language. See, as some of you might be aware, the majority of Japanese writing uses kanji. But what some of you may not know is that kanji isn't Japanese. Kanji is Chinese. But kanji was changed syllabarically, that is to say they changed how it was spoken and repurposed for the Japanese language. But if you could read kanji, you can read both Chinese and Japanese. But the kanji symbol for something like bread in Chinese will be pronounced bread in Chinese, but shoe in Japanese. But in both languages, it will mean bread. But once again, you're saying,
Okay, to assume that Kishimoto understands etymologically exactly where all kanji came from and therefore was able to deduce the symbology of the sun in the Chinese oracle scripts to put one on Kishimoto's forehead, it's kind of a stretch.
is fair. It's a fair statement to make. But at the same time, kanji is actually kind of like pictures. That is to say that simplified kanji is actually usually a rough sketch of what they're trying to talk about. And anybody who's ever tried to learn kanji knows this. This is the kanji for a knife, which is based off of a cleaver. This is the kanji for a hand, which is based off a hand. And all of these components hail from the origins of the Chinese oracle scripts. Every Japanese and Chinese person at some point in their life has to learn kanji. It's not like learning English where you learn the phonetic pronunciation of A through Z and are able to put those together. If you want to be able to read kanji, you need to learn every single kanji symbol. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of overlap between symbols, and once you learn a couple of symbols, you can usually parse together what the kanji is, but it still takes most people until 7th grade to learn all kanji. So the fact that Kishimoto might have known the etymological beginnings of the kanji for sun, not crazy. Now, the other camp of Hashirama's symbols are the symbols he grows around his eyes, which in my video describing that he was a slug sage, I connected to Lady Katsuyo's marks along her body. However, I will admit that this theory gives a much better explanation for where these symbols around his eyes come from. See, this theory posits that the symbols that grow around Hashirama's eyes are actually the Eye of Ra. That is to say that they're the same eye markings of the god of the sun in Egyptian mythology has Ra. Now, fortunately, this connection needs much less explanation. The Eye of Ra does objectively look a lot like Hashirama's eye symbols, as the Eye of Ra has a band of darkness that goes around the eye, then extends down with the nose and then across the cheeks. The only difference between the Eye of Ra and Hashirama's markings is that the Eye of Ra curls on the cheek. But besides that, the similarities are most definitely there. So in just the symbols that appear on Hashirama's face, we have 2 symbols that allude to either a god of sun or just the sun itself. And Hashirama having a connection to the god of the sun in Ra makes sense when you consider the fact that Hashirama himself was considered a god of the shinobi. It makes double sense when you consider how much Kishimoto loves using the semiology or simply just the names of gods in his show, as he leans heavily on the 7 lucky gods or the gods of Shinto lore, with gods names like Susanoo, Amaterasu, Kagutsuchi, all of those appearing all throughout Naruto. However, Ra, an Egyptian god making it into Naruto, would be a bit peculiar, as it would be the only time in the entire writing of Naruto that we ever see anything as it pertains to Egyptian mythology show up. Almost everything, and I mean everything in Naruto, can draw its roots to a couple of different things. And those couple of different things are either Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto lore, or the journey to the West. But considering how much Kishimoto likes to work in mythology and religion into his works, him working in Egyptian mythology isn't the craziest thought. It's just something he hadn't done prior. Outside of the semiology of all of it, Hashirama being a sun sage makes a fair amount of sense. Why does it make a fair amount of sense, you ask? Well, for the same reason that Hashirama being a beaver sage or a woodpecker sage makes sense. Hashirama being a sun sage would make sense because he controls wood with his wood release. And obviously wood and trees and plants can't grow without the sun, and therefore Hashirama being a sun sage is a play on photosynthesis. So narratively, him being a sun sage does make a fair amount of sense. It makes even more sense when you think about Kishimoto's writing style for even 2 seconds. See, there is no trope, and I mean no trope, that Kishimoto likes more than the old sun and moon reflection of each other. That is to say, 2 characters pop up in the story simultaneously, and one is meant to symbolize the sun while the other is meant to symbolize the moon. If hypothetically Hashirama was a sun sage, and therefore we say Hashirama is meant to represent the sun, then Madara would be the logical reflection of the moon, which makes sense when we consider the Uchiha's storied connection to the moon and the fact that Madara's entire plan, the Infinite Tsukiyomi plan, is built around reflecting his Tsukiyomi off of the moon. It's yin and yang, and this trope pops up over and over and over and over again throughout Naruto. In the very, and I mean very beginning of Naruto, when Hagoromo and Hamura were battling against Kaguya, how did they seal her? The sun and moon seal. They both had one on their palms, and when they both came into contact with Kaguya, they were able to use the 6-pass Chubaku Tensei. And not only did they combine their sun and moon auras to seal Kaguya, but they also created the moon which Hamura would go on to live on, while Hagoromo would continue to be the reflection of the earth, bringing energy and power to the earth through the medium of ninja. Hagoromo and Hamura aren't the only people to ever seal Kaguya using the sun and moon seal. Obviously, Naruto and Sasuke also do it. Once again, showing us that Naruto is the sun and Sasuke is the moon. But it doesn't stop there, because Naruto and Sasuke are able to be the sun and the moon because they're the reincarnations of Indra and Ashura, who are the sun and the moon. But it doesn't stop there, because the tropes continue beyond even Naruto Shippuden, as Mitsuki is constantly looking at the moon and calls Boruto his son, and therefore Mitsuki and Boruto have become the sun and the moon trope. But it doesn't stop there, because Ada and Sarada are also the sun and the moon, with Ada's Senrigan resembling a moon and Sarada's MS resembling a sun, which is supposed to be a callback to Naruto the Last, when there was a battle on the moon between 2 separate ideologies of the clan that Hamura had created over the thousands of years that clan had existed on the moon, where one ideology believed they shouldn't interfere with the world that Hagoromo built, while the other believed that they needed to step in, and one of those ideologies held a sun flag while the other held a moon flag. So there is certainly a precedent for Hashirama possibly being the symbolic representation of the sun.
But Nick, I feel like there's a but coming.
And that's because there is. See, this theory is a lot of fun, but I think this theory unfortunately falls into the false equivalence category. See, while both of the symbols that appear on Hashirama's face tying their roots to the sun is compelling, well, there obviously being a long track record of Ashura's reincarnates being tied to the sun while Indra's are tied to the moon, unfortunately, aesthetics is kind of all this theory has going for it. See, somewhat ironically and very unfortunately for this theory, the only time we ever see Hashirama activate his sage mode is at night. In fact, the only time we see anybody ever activate Hashirama Sage Mode is at night. See, we've only ever seen Hashirama Sage Mode used 3 times, if I'm correct. And those 3 times are in the Valley of the End fight between Hashirama and Madara, which happens at night, and then twice during the War Arc, once by Madara and once by Hashirama, which also happens at night. Now, obviously, there's a possibility that anybody who uses Hashirama Sage Mode is able to store up sun that they come into contact with during the day, and then unleash it in the form of their Sage Mode, even if it is at night. And one could even make the argument that this is kind of how plants work, as a big part of the photosynthesis cycle actually happens at night. But you gotta admit, if he's a Sun Sage, only ever seeing this Sun Sage Mode when the sun isn't up doesn't look super compelling. On top of this, who teaches you Sun Sage Mode? Is it the sun? Do you just have to get a certain amount of a tan and then eventually you've mastered the wavelengths of the universe? And if you can become a Sun Sage, why hasn't any other reincarnation of Ashura ever been one? Are we operating on the assumption that Hashirama taught this Sage Mode to himself, like we're doing with the human and/or tree Sage Mode? And if we are, that's fine. It's just significantly less compelling than Hashirama stumbling upon one of the unexplored Sage regions and talking to one of the Sage animals to learn a Sage Mode that has tie-ins to the abilities we know he has. So overall, this theory is a lot of fun, and the research required to formulate this kind of theory is impressive. And quite honestly, if we're operating strictly on the assumptions of aesthetics, I would say that him being a Sun Sage is the most accurate assumption, because if we're being real, all of the assumptions made for him being a Sun Sage are substantially more accurate aesthetically than him being a slug sage. As the only similarity that Hashirama has to Lady Katsuyo aesthetically is the fact that they both have stripes of some sort on them. But honestly, I'll leave it up to you guys. What kind of sage do you believe Hashirama is, now that you've heard all of this possible information about him being a sun sage? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. The sun is a deadly laser.